Tonight, dear friend, we travel back to the wide-open American frontier, where the first light of dawn finds a lone horseback mail carrier preparing for another peaceful journey across endless prairies, quiet mountain passes, and scattered frontier towns. Together, we'll discover how simple leather mailbags carried not only letters, but also hope, friendship, and news across a vast and untamed land. Before sunrise at the frontier post office. Tonight, dear friend, we travel back to the American frontier, where the world is still wrapped in darkness and the stars linger quietly above endless grasslands. Long before ranchers begin their chores or shopkeepers unlock their doors, another ordinary day is already preparing to unfold. Our journey follows a horseback mail carrier whose peaceful work quietly binds scattered families and distant communities together, one carefully delivered letter at a time. As always, before we settle into this gentle adventure, take a slow, comfortable breath. Let your shoulders grow a little lighter. Imagine the cool morning air against your face and the soft rhythm of hooves upon an old dirt road. There is nowhere to hurry tonight. We have only history, quiet company, and a long trail stretching peacefully toward the horizon. The frontier town still slept beneath a blanket of stars. Only a handful of windows glowed with candlelight, their warm amber light spilling gently onto the wooden boardwalks below. A cool breeze drifted through the empty streets, carrying the clean scent of sagebrush, damp earth, and distant pine forests from the nearby hills. Above, the sky shimmered with countless stars. The great sweep of the Milky Way stretched from one horizon to the other, bright enough that even without a lantern, the outlines of barns, corrals, and weathered wooden buildings could still be seen against the darkness. The only sound was the occasional creak of a hanging sign gently moving in the breeze. Then another sound joined it, soft footsteps, measured, unhurried. A tall man wearing a broad-brimmed felt hat walked steadily toward the small frontier post office standing at the corner of Main Street. His name was Samuel Harper. For nearly 15 years, Samuel had carried the United States mail across hundreds of miles of prairie, mountain trails, winding rivers, and lonely settlements scattered throughout the American West. He was not famous. Few people beyond the towns along his route even knew his name. Yet nearly everyone recognized the familiar sight of his horse appearing over distant hills with 2 heavy leather mailbags hanging from the saddle. To many families, Samuel did not simply bring letters. He brought birthdays, good harvest news, wedding invitations, Christmas greetings, business agreements, family photographs. Sometimes joyful news, sometimes difficult news, always hope. Samuel paused before the post office door. The building itself was simple. Rough pine boards formed its walls. A small porch sheltered the entrance from rain and snow. Above the doorway hung a hand-painted sign reading simply, United States Post Office. No decoration was needed. Its purpose was understood by everyone who passed through town. Samuel removed a small brass key from his pocket. The lock clicked softly. Inside, the familiar smell greeted him immediately. Old paper, ink, leather, wood, and the faint scent of yesterday's fire still lingering inside the iron stove. It smelled like another ordinary morning. He smiled quietly. The room was modest. Shelves lined every wall. Small wooden pigeonholes held letters waiting for nearby residents. Canvas mail sacks rested neatly beside a sturdy oak sorting table polished smooth after years of faithful service. Near one window stood a heavy cast-iron stove. Though cold now, it would soon warm the room as winter slowly approached later in the year. Samuel lit an oil lamp. Golden light slowly filled the room, chasing gentle shadows into every corner. One by one, familiar objects emerged from the darkness. Bundles of newspapers tied neatly with twine. small parcels wrapped carefully in brown paper, letters bearing elegant handwriting, official government documents sealed with wax, tiny packages whose contents remained a mystery except to those eagerly awaiting them many miles away. Every piece carried someone's story. Every envelope represented a conversation continuing across impossible distances. Samuel carefully removed his gloves. The day's work always began the same way. Not with writing, with sorting. He untied the large canvas mail sack delivered late the previous evening by the westbound stagecoach. Letters spilled gently across the wooden table. Some had traveled from Boston, others from Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco. Even a few from Europe had crossed the Atlantic before making their way across America's growing frontier. Each letter would continue its remarkable journey today. Samuel worked slowly, not because he lacked skill, because accuracy mattered more than speed. He read each address carefully before placing it into one of several smaller piles. North Route, Mountain Route, river settlements, South Prairie ranches. Every destination represented hours of horseback travel, sometimes entire days. Outside, the first faint hint of dawn appeared low along the eastern horizon. The stars still shone brightly overhead, yet a narrow band of pale silver quietly announced another morning's arrival. Samuel opened one of the windows slightly. Cool air drifted inside. Somewhere nearby, a rooster greeted the coming sunrise. A few moments later, another answered from farther across town. Soon several joined together, one by one, like neighbors exchanging quiet greetings. The frontier was slowly waking. Samuel finished tying the last bundle. Satisfied, he reached for the 2 thick leather mailbags that would accompany him throughout the day. Years of weather had darkened the leather to a rich chestnut brown. The brass buckles had been polished, smooth through constant use. Each bag felt wonderfully familiar beneath his hands. They had traveled thousands of miles together. He checked every strap, every buckle, every stitch. A broken strap many miles from town could mean soaked letters during a rainstorm or lost mail along a rocky trail. Preparation prevented problems. That lesson had served him well throughout his career. With everything packed securely, Samuel extinguished the lamp. Morning light now entered freely through the eastern windows. Outside, the town had begun quietly stretching awake. Thin ribbons of chimney smoke curled upward into the cool air. A bakery several buildings away had already begun its work. The warm smell of fresh bread drifted gently along Main Street. Nearby, someone swept yesterday's dust from a wooden porch. A blacksmith opened the stable doors, allowing sleepy horses to step into the crisp morning. Everything moved calmly, predictably, comfortably. Samuel crossed the street toward the small stable standing behind the post office. Before he reached the doorway, a familiar soft whinny greeted him. "I know," he said with a gentle smile. "I'm a little later than yesterday." Inside waited his oldest companion, Dusty. The sturdy bay gelding lifted his head over the stall door with quiet patience. His dark coat gleamed even beneath the dim stable light. Years upon the frontier had left tiny white hairs around his muzzle, giving him the dignified appearance of an old friend who had earned every mile beneath his hooves. Samuel rubbed the horse's forehead. Dusty leaned gently into the familiar touch. Their morning routine rarely changed. Fresh water first, then oats. A careful brushing to remove yesterday's trail dust. Only after breakfast came the saddle. Samuel worked without hurry. The stiff bristled brush moved steadily across Dusty's coat, lifting loose hair while the horse stood peacefully enjoying the attention. Outside, swallows darted through the brightening sky. Sunlight finally reached the highest rooftops. Soon it would spill across the open prairie waiting beyond town. Samuel lifted the well-worn saddle onto Dusty's broad back with practiced ease. The thick leather creaked softly. Every strap found its proper place. Every buckle tightened comfortably. Last came the 2 heavy mailbags, balanced carefully, one on each side. Years of experience had taught Samuel exactly how to distribute the weight so neither horse nor rider would tire unnecessarily during the long journey ahead. He stepped back for one final look. Everything was ready. Dusty pawed the ground once, eager but never impatient. Samuel smiled beneath the brim of his hat. "Looks like another beautiful day for the trail." Together they stepped from the stable into the cool frontier morning. The first rays of sunrise spread slowly across the prairie, turning fields of tall grass into waves of glowing gold. Beyond the final buildings of town, the winding dirt road disappeared toward distant hills where rivers, ranches, lonely cabins, and waiting letters lay beyond the horizon. Samuel adjusted the reins gently. Dusty took his first steady steps onto the trail. Behind them, the little frontier town continued waking beneath the golden light of dawn. Ahead stretched another ordinary day carrying messages of love, friendship, hope, and home across the quiet American West. And so, beneath an endless sky and the peaceful rhythm of steady hoofbeats, the long journey quietly began. Riding across the endless prairie, the rising sun followed Samuel and Dusty as they left the last wooden buildings of the frontier town behind. Within only a few minutes, the sounds of daily life had faded into silence. No hammer striking an anvil, no wagon wheels rolling across wooden streets, no voices drifting from front porches. Only the steady rhythm of Dusty's hooves upon the packed earth, accompanied by the gentle whisper of prairie grasses bending beneath the morning breeze. The trail stretched ahead like a narrow ribbon, disappearing into an ocean of softly rolling hills. This was the American frontier in its quietest form. No fences interrupted the horizon for miles. No telegraph poles yet crossed this section of the country. Only open sky meeting endless land. Samuel always enjoyed this first hour of the journey more than any other. Morning belonged to those willing to rise before everyone else. The prairie seemed to breathe more slowly before the heat of the day arrived. Tiny drops of dew still clung to every blade of buffalo grass. When the sunlight reached them, thousands of sparkling droplets shimmered like scattered pieces of crystal stretching across the landscape. Dusty walked at an easy pace. There was no reason to hurry. Samuel knew every mile of today's route almost by heart. A small creek lay several miles ahead. Beyond that stood the Henderson Ranch. Then another hour would bring him to a tiny settlement where children often waited outside the general store on mail days. But there was plenty of time before then. The morning itself deserved to be noticed. A meadowlark landed upon a weathered fence post beside the trail. Its cheerful song floated across the open grasslands, bright but never hurried. Samuel smiled beneath the brim of his hat. Few sounds reminded him of the prairie more than a meadowlark greeting the sunrise. Dusty flicked one ear toward the bird before continuing steadily onward. He had heard countless meadowlarks throughout his years on the trail. Perhaps horses grew fond of familiar sounds just as people did. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of wild sage. Mixed with it came the fresh fragrance of damp earth warmed by the first rays of morning sunlight. Samuel breathed deeply. Every season had its own scent upon the frontier. Spring smelled of rain and fresh grass. Summer carried wildflowers and warm dust. Autumn brought dry leaves and cool pine forests. Winter smelled wonderfully clean, touched by snow and wood smoke drifting from lonely cabins. Each season quietly announced itself long before the calendar ever could. Far ahead, movement caught Samuel's attention. A small group of pronghorn antelope grazed peacefully upon a gentle hillside. Their tan coats blended almost perfectly with the golden prairie grasses. Only their bright white markings stood out against the landscape. Samuel gently eased the reins. Dusty slowed without needing to be asked twice. The antelope lifted their heads together. For several quiet moments, people and animals simply observed one another across the open field. No fear, only curiosity. Then, almost as if responding to an invisible signal, the little herd bounded gracefully away. Their movements appeared almost effortless. Each leap carried them farther across the prairie until they gradually disappeared beyond a distant rise. Samuel watched them with quiet admiration. "They always make it look so easy," Dusty answered with a soft snort. Perhaps he agreed. The trail curved gently toward a shallow stream lined with cottonwood trees. Their broad green leaves shimmered softly in the morning breeze, producing a pleasant rustling sound unlike any other tree on the frontier. Samuel always welcomed these small groves. They offered shade during summer afternoons and shelter whenever unexpected rain swept across the prairie. The stream itself flowed gently over smooth stones polished by centuries of moving water. It was not wide. Dusty stepped across it with practiced confidence. Clear water rippled around his sturdy legs before settling peacefully once again. Samuel glanced down. Tiny trout darted through the deeper pools beneath overhanging branches. Dragonflies hovered above the surface, their delicate wings sparkling in the sunlight. Everything seemed wonderfully alive, yet nothing felt hurried. Beyond the stream, the land rose gradually toward a broad ridge covered with waist-high grasses. From its crest, Samuel could see nearly 10 miles in every direction. This had always been one of his favorite viewpoints. He paused there for a few moments, allowing Dusty to rest. The prairie spread endlessly beneath the enormous blue sky. Scattered ranches rested beside winding creeks. Thin trails connected isolated homesteads like quiet threads stitching together an enormous quilt. Far to the west, the faint outline of the Rocky Mountains rested against the horizon. Even from this distance, their snow-covered peaks gleamed brilliantly beneath the growing morning sun. Those mountains often reminded Samuel how vast his route truly was. Some weeks carried him through grassy plains. Others led him deep into narrow canyons and evergreen forests where cool mountain streams crossed rocky paths. Every journey offered familiar roads and new surprises. That balance suited him well. From somewhere behind the ridge came another sound. Slow wagon wheels. Samuel turned. A covered farm wagon emerged gradually over the hill. 2 chestnut horses pulled it steadily along the trail while an elderly farmer guided the reins from the driver's seat. Beside him sat his wife holding a woven basket covered with a neatly folded cloth. The couple smiled as they approached. "Morning, Samuel! Good morning! Looks like fine weather." "It certainly does." The farmer glanced toward the leather mailbags hanging beside Dusty's saddle. "Anything for our place today?" Samuel loosened one strap and checked the neatly arranged bundles. After only a moment, he smiled. "You've got 2 letters." The farmer's eyes brightened. "My oldest boy?" Samuel examined the handwriting. "I believe so." The elderly man's weathered face softened immediately. His son had moved nearly 2 years earlier to help establish a cattle ranch farther west. Letters had become the family's bridge across hundreds of lonely miles. Samuel carefully handed over both envelopes. The woman accepted them gently, almost as though they were fragile treasures. She ran her fingers softly across the familiar handwriting. "We'll read them together after supper. I hope they're filled with good news." "So do we." After wishing each other safe travels, they continued in opposite directions. Samuel watched until the wagon disappeared among the rolling hills. He often wondered how many conversations began because of the letters resting inside his mailbags. News of newborn grandchildren, harvest successes, wedding invitations, simple greetings. Sometimes no important news at all, only reminders that someone far away still cared enough to write. Those ordinary letters often carried the greatest comfort. The trail narrowed once again. Blue wildflowers dotted both sides of the road, their delicate petals gently swaying with every passing breeze. Butterflies drifted lazily from blossom to blossom. Bees hummed patiently among the flowers, never appearing rushed despite the countless blooms waiting around them. Samuel tipped his hat slightly to shield his eyes from the now brighter sunlight. The day was warming comfortably. Dusty maintained his steady rhythm without encouragement. Years together had taught horse and rider the value of consistency. Neither wasted energy. Neither hurried when patience served them better. A small wooden sign appeared beside the trail. Its painted letters had faded after years beneath sun, rain, and snow. Still, they remained readable. Willow Creek Settlement, 6 miles. Samuel smiled. They were making good time. Beyond Willow Creek waited friendly faces, fresh coffee at the general store, and another collection of letters that would soon find their rightful owners. But first came several peaceful miles of prairie, still untouched by the day's busier hours. The breeze grew slightly warmer. Above, a hawk circled effortlessly upon rising currents of air. Its wide wings hardly seemed to move. It simply floated across the enormous sky, watching the quiet world below. Samuel followed its graceful path until it became only a tiny shape against the blue. There was something deeply comforting about days like this. Nothing extraordinary needed to happen. The beauty rested within ordinary moments. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the scent of wild sage, the warmth of the morning sun upon weathered leather, the promise held inside carefully written letters, and the quiet understanding that every mile traveled brought distant people just a little closer together. Ahead, the rooftops of Willow Creek slowly appeared above the waving prairie grass, their chimneys catching the bright morning light. Another peaceful stop awaited along the long frontier road. Small towns along the route. The little settlement of Willow Creek appeared gradually rather than all at once. From a distance, only a few wisps of chimney smoke rose above the prairie. Then came the outline of a white church steeple. A weathered windmill slowly turned in the morning breeze. Finally, as Samuel and Dusty drew closer, the town revealed itself one peaceful building at a time. Willow Creek was not large. Perhaps 30 families called it home. A handful of wooden businesses stood along one broad dirt street, each built by local hands using pine and cottonwood timber hauled from nearby valleys. Their front porches stretched toward the road, providing welcome shade during the long summer afternoons. Nothing about the town appeared grand. Its beauty rested in its quiet simplicity. A blacksmith's forge stood near the entrance, its brick chimney sending a thin ribbon of smoke into the brightening sky. Across the street, a modest general store displayed barrels of flour, sacks of coffee beans, coils of rope, lanterns, and sturdy leather boots beneath its porch roof. Beside it stood the barber's shop, the doctor's office, and a small schoolhouse where children would soon gather for another day of lessons. Samuel always enjoyed arriving before the busiest hours. The town still carried the peaceful feeling of morning. Mrs. Parker was already sweeping the wooden boardwalk outside her bakery. The rich aroma of fresh biscuits, cinnamon, and warm bread drifted across the street, making the whole town seem even more welcoming. She looked up and smiled. "Morning! Samuel! Good morning! I've just pulled the first biscuits from the oven. I can smell them!" She laughed gently. "I'll save one for you. I'd be grateful." Further along the street, old Mr. Thompson rocked slowly in his wooden chair outside the general store. Though well into his 70s, he arrived almost every morning before sunrise. He claimed the rocking chair helped him greet every traveler entering town. Samuel suspected he simply enjoyed watching the world wake up. He tipped his hat. "Morning! Morning yourself!" Mr. Thompson nodded toward the mailbags. "Looks like another full load. They always seem to fill themselves. So long as folks keep writing, Samuel smiled. I hope they never stop. Outside the schoolhouse, several children had already gathered despite classes not beginning for another half hour. They weren't waiting for their teacher. They were watching the road, watching for Samuel. The moment one little boy spotted Dusty coming down the street, his face brightened. He's here! Within seconds, 4 children hurried toward the hitching rail outside the post office. None rushed recklessly. Their parents had taught them proper manners. But excitement still danced across every smiling face. Samuel carefully swung down from the saddle. Good morning, everyone! A chorus of cheerful greetings answered him. Morning, Mr. Harper! Did any letters come? My uncle said he'd write. My brother's working in Colorado! Samuel chuckled softly. Let's see what today's mail has to say. Inside the small Willow Creek post office, the room felt comfortably familiar. Unlike the larger office where Samuel had begun his morning, this one served only the surrounding farms and ranches. A row of polished wooden mailboxes lined one wall. Behind the counter stood Miss Eleanor Brooks, the town's postmistress. She greeted Samuel with the warm smile she always seemed to wear. Right on schedule. I've had a good morning for riding. She accepted the heavy leather mailbags while Samuel removed his gloves. Together they began sorting the letters. Each envelope found its proper place. Mr. Walker, Mrs. Jenkins, the Wilson Ranch, Dr. Harris, the schoolhouse, the church. Some names appeared every week, others only once every few months. Miss Brooks paused over one elegant envelope. From Philadelphia, for the Reynolds family. They'll be pleased. They've been expecting word. Samuel always found quiet satisfaction in moments like these. He rarely knew what the letters contained, nor did he wish to. The stories belonged to those receiving them. His task was simply to ensure they arrived safely. Outside, the children waited patiently. One by one, families entered the post office. A rancher collected an order for new horseshoes. A widow received a carefully wrapped parcel tied with blue ribbon. A young couple smiled together while reading a letter from relatives back east. Each delivery lasted only a few moments, yet every exchange seemed to brighten someone's day. A little girl stood near the doorway clutching a small bouquet of prairie flowers. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. When Miss Brooks handed her a single envelope, her eyes sparkled. It's from Grandma, Samuel smiled. Will you write back? Oh yes, I've been practicing my handwriting. She proudly held up a small notebook filled with careful letters. Samuel admired the neat rows. It looks wonderful. My teacher says every letter should be written slowly. Your teacher gives excellent advice. The little girl tucked the envelope safely inside her basket beside the flowers. Then she skipped happily toward home. Watching her disappear down the dusty street, Samuel found himself thinking once again how extraordinary ordinary letters could be. A few simple pages of ink could travel hundreds of miles and still carry warmth, encouragement, and love. No wonder people waited so patiently for the mail. Around mid-morning, Samuel stepped across the street toward Mrs. Parker's bakery. True to her promise, one warm biscuit waited on the windowsill beside a small crock of fresh butter. She poured him a cup of hot coffee. Long ride ahead? Another 20 miles before sunset. You'll want a second biscuit. I don't think I'd argue with that. She laughed softly. That's what I hoped. Samuel carried his breakfast onto the porch where Mr. Thompson still rocked peacefully beneath the shade. For several minutes neither man spoke. They simply watched the quiet rhythm of the town. A farmer loaded sacks of grain into his wagon. Two boys carefully led a pair of milk cows toward the pasture. The blacksmith gently tapped a horseshoe into shape. Church bells rang once in the distance, marking the hour. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing needed to. The simple routines of ordinary people created a comforting harmony all their own. Eventually, Mr. Thompson broke the silence. You know, Samuel looked over. I've been sitting on this porch almost 20 years. I believe you have. I can always tell the day by who's walking down the street. Samuel smiled. And today? The baker first, the school children next, then you. I suppose that's become part of the town's routine. Mr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. Folks don't just wait for the letters. They wait for the feeling that the world beyond these hills still remembers them. Samuel quietly considered those words. Perhaps that was true. The frontier often felt enormous. Mountains, prairies, long rivers, great distances. Yet every carefully delivered envelope quietly stitched those distant places together. The mail carried more than news. It carried belonging. Soon it was time to continue. Samuel thanked Mrs. Parker for breakfast, wished Miss Brooks a pleasant day, and adjusted the leather mailbags once more upon Dusty's saddle. The children gathered again near the hitching rail. Safe travels, Mr. Harper! See you next week! Samuel tipped his hat. I'll look forward to it. Dusty stepped calmly back onto the winding trail, leaving Willow Creek behind. The cheerful sounds of the little settlement gradually faded into the gentle whisper of prairie grasses once again. Ahead, the land slowly began to rise toward the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where cool pine forests, sparkling streams, and quiet mountain passes waited beneath another peaceful stretch of open sky. The journey continued, one steady hoofbeat at a time, through the mountain pass. By the time Willow Creek had disappeared behind the rolling hills, the prairie had begun to change. The endless waves of golden grass gradually gave way to scattered groves of cottonwood and aspen. Small hills rose gently from the earth, their slopes dotted with clusters of sagebrush and wildflowers that nodded peacefully in the breeze. Far ahead, the Rocky Mountains no longer appeared as a faint blue line upon the horizon. They now stood proudly before Samuel, their rugged peaks reaching into an impossibly clear sky. Even after 15 years on this route, they never failed to capture his attention. There was something comforting about mountains. They seemed timeless, long before stagecoaches crossed these trails, long before ranches spread across the valleys, long before towns like Willow Creek appeared upon the prairie. The mountains had already stood here, quietly watching the seasons pass. Samuel often imagined how many generations had looked upon these same peaks with the very same sense of wonder. Dusty continued at his steady pace. The old bay horse seemed to recognize every turn in the trail as well as Samuel himself. Together they approached the foothills where the broad prairie narrowed into a winding valley. The air changed almost immediately. It grew cooler, fresher, carrying with it the clean scent of pine needles, damp stone, and flowing water. Samuel breathed deeply. He always welcomed mountain air. It seemed to wash away the dust gathered during long hours upon the open plains. Soon the first tall ponderosa pines appeared beside the trail. Their reddish trunks rose high into the sunlight, while long green needles whispered softly overhead whenever the breeze passed through their branches. Unlike the wide open prairie, the forest wrapped travelers in a quiet embrace. The sounds became gentler here. Instead of meadowlarks singing across open fields, chickadees fluttered from branch to branch. Woodpeckers tapped patiently upon weathered trunks somewhere deeper within the trees. A red squirrel darted across the trail carrying a pine cone nearly as large as its own head. Dusty watched it disappear beneath a fallen log. Samuel smiled. There goes another busy worker. The horse flicked one ear as though listening carefully. The trail gradually climbed higher. Large granite boulders rested among the pines, their smooth surfaces covered with pale green moss and delicate patches of lichen that had grown there for decades. Small ferns unfurled beneath their shadows. Wild columbine flowers bloomed beside trickling streams, their deep blue petals glowing brightly against the rich green forest floor. Samuel often thought mountain trails encouraged slower travel, not because they were especially difficult, because they invited people to notice more. Every bend revealed something beautiful, a hidden waterfall, a fallen tree covered in mushrooms, sunlight filtering through towering branches. Even the silence felt different, not empty, simply peaceful. Around midday, the trail crossed a narrow wooden bridge spanning a lively mountain creek. Clear water rushed over rounded stones, polished smooth through countless years. Tiny rainbows shimmered briefly wherever sunlight touched the spray. Samuel guided Dusty onto the bridge. The old timbers creaked gently beneath the horse's weight. Halfway across, Samuel paused. He always paused here. The creek was one of his favorite places along the entire route. He leaned slightly over the wooden railing. Brook trout glided effortlessly through the crystal-clear pools below. The water was so transparent that every pebble upon the creek bed appeared close enough to touch. Along the far bank, delicate yellow butterflies gathered near patches of damp sand. Nearby, a family of ducks drifted quietly downstream. Everything moved according to its own gentle rhythm. No one seemed to hurry. Dusty lowered his head, listening to the soothing sound of moving water. Samuel rubbed the horse's neck. "We've still got a few miles before lunch," Dusty answered with a soft breath. Together they crossed the remainder of the bridge and continued climbing. The forest became denser. Towering spruce trees gradually joined the pines, their dark green branches creating cool patches of shade across the winding trail. Here and there, beams of sunlight slipped between the branches like golden ribbons, illuminating drifting particles of dust floating lazily through the still air. Samuel always enjoyed riding through these shifting patterns of light. Each step carried horse and rider from warm sunshine into cool shade, then back again. The changing light made the forest feel quietly alive. A distant sound floated through the trees. Not voices, not wagon wheels, only the faint ringing of a small bell. Samuel smiled. He recognized it immediately. Somewhere ahead, a small herd of grazing cattle wore brass bells around their necks. The gentle chiming echoed softly through the valley whenever they moved among the trees. A few minutes later, the cattle came into view. They grazed peacefully beside a grassy meadow where a young ranch hand watched from beneath a broad-brimmed hat. He raised one hand in greeting. "Afternoon!" Samuel returned the wave. "Beautiful day. Couldn't ask for better." The ranch hand glanced toward the leather mailbags. "Anything headed up to Miller's cabin?" Samuel checked the route list tucked safely inside one pocket. One newspaper and a letter. "They'll be pleased. They've been waiting since last week. I'll make sure it gets there." The young man thanked him before turning his attention back toward the grazing cattle. Samuel continued onward. Encounters like these never lasted long. Out here, even brief conversations carried a quiet friendliness. People understood how far apart neighbors often lived. Every meeting became an opportunity to exchange a few warm words before continuing on separate paths. The trail narrowed as it entered a rocky pass between two towering cliffs. Here the breeze cooled noticeably. Small patches of snow still lingered beneath shaded ledges despite the warmth of summer. Water trickled gently from cracks in the stone, feeding tiny moss-covered springs that sparkled beneath the afternoon sunlight. Samuel removed his hat for a moment. The cool mountain air felt refreshing against his forehead. High above, an eagle circled effortlessly. Its broad wings hardly moved. It simply floated upon invisible currents rising from the valley below. Samuel watched until it disappeared behind the cliffs. He wondered how many travelers throughout history had paused beneath this very same sky to admire the same graceful flight. Dusty climbed steadily, never missing a step upon the rocky path. Years of mountain travel had taught him exactly where to place each hoof. Samuel trusted him completely. There was comfort in that trust. Neither horse nor rider needed many words. After thousands of shared miles, they understood one another almost instinctively. Eventually, the trail reached the highest point of the pass. Samuel gently brought Dusty to a stop. From here, the view stretched farther than almost anywhere else along today's journey. Behind them lay the endless prairie glowing beneath the afternoon sun. Ahead waited another valley filled with forests, winding rivers, scattered ranches, and lonely cabins patiently awaiting the day's mail. The breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Cloud shadows drifted slowly across the mountainsides below. For several quiet moments, Samuel simply sat in the saddle, taking in the peaceful beauty surrounding him. Moments like this reminded him why he never wished for another occupation. The work demanded long hours. The trails could be difficult. Yet few people were fortunate enough to greet such magnificent landscapes as part of an ordinary day's work. He gently adjusted the leather mailbags resting against Dusty's sides. The letters inside remained safe. Some would soon bring happy smiles. Others would simply remind someone that they had not been forgotten. Every mile carried those messages closer to waiting hands. Samuel settled his hat once more beneath the warm afternoon sun. "Come on, old friend." Dusty stepped forward. Together they began the slow descent into the quiet valley beyond, where new faces, peaceful homesteads, and another chapter of the frontier's gentle story waited just around the next bend. The noon rest beneath the cottonwoods. The mountain trail gradually began to descend. With every careful step, Dusty carried Samuel farther down the western slope, where the cool scent of pine slowly blended once again with the warm fragrance of sunlit grass and flowing water. The afternoon sun had climbed high overhead, but beneath the tall evergreens, the air remained pleasantly cool. Soft shadows stretched across the winding trail. Needles from the towering pines formed a gentle carpet beneath Dusty's hooves, muffling each step until even the familiar rhythm of the journey became quieter than before. Samuel always appreciated this part of the route. It felt like nature itself was encouraging travelers to slow down. A small breeze wandered lazily through the branches above. The trees answered with a whisper that seemed almost like quiet conversation. Somewhere nearby, a mountain chickadee called cheerfully. Farther away, the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker echoed through the forest. Nothing disturbed the peaceful balance of the afternoon. The trail curved around a cluster of granite boulders before opening into a broad meadow surrounded by cottonwood trees. Their leaves shimmered like tiny silver coins whenever the breeze passed through them. Sunlight danced across the grass below, creating moving patterns that shifted almost too slowly to notice. At the far edge of the meadow flowed the little river Samuel had been looking forward to all morning. Its waters were clear enough to reflect every drifting cloud above. The river wasn't especially wide, nor was it deep. Instead, it moved with quiet confidence over smooth stones polished by countless generations of flowing water. Samuel smiled. This seems like the perfect place. Dusty needed no encouragement. The old bay horse lowered his head slightly as if he already understood that the morning's journey had come to its peaceful halfway point. Samuel guided him toward the shade of an enormous cottonwood whose broad branches stretched over both grass and riverbank. The tree must have been decades old, perhaps even older than the nearby settlements themselves. Its thick trunk carried deep ridges carved by weather and time. Its roots disappeared beneath the soft earth beside the river. Samuel dismounted carefully. The familiar stiffness in his legs reminded him that even experienced riders appreciated moments of rest. Dusty stood patiently while Samuel loosened the saddle straps. The heavy leather mailbags remained secured. The mail never left his sight. That habit had become second nature years ago. He removed the saddle blanket, allowing cool air to reach Dusty's back. The horse stretched his neck happily before wandering a few steps toward a patch of fresh grass. Nearby, Samuel filled a small canvas bucket with cool river water. Dusty drank slowly, never rushing, just as he seemed to approach every task in life. Watching him always reminded Samuel that there was wisdom in steady patience. The horse had crossed rivers, snowstorms, summer heat, rocky mountain passes. Yet he had never learned to hurry. Perhaps people could learn something from horses. Samuel knelt beside the river. The water felt wonderfully cool against his hands. He splashed a little across his face before removing his hat and letting the gentle breeze dry the last traces of morning dust. Tiny fish darted between rounded stones beneath the surface. Dragonflies hovered gracefully above patches of reeds. Every few moments the sunlight reflected from the water in bright flashes that danced beneath the cottonwood branches. He unpacked his simple lunch. Nothing elaborate. 2 biscuits wrapped carefully in cloth, a slice of smoked ham, a piece of sharp cheddar cheese, 1 crisp apple, and a small tin cup for coffee. Simple meals always seem to taste better outdoors, especially after a long morning on horseback. Samuel settled comfortably against the broad trunk of the cottonwood. Its rough bark felt pleasantly cool despite the warmth of the day. Above him, thousands of leaves rustled softly together. The sound reminded him of gentle rainfall, steady, comforting, never loud enough to interrupt peaceful thoughts. As he ate, he watched the quiet life surrounding the river. A pair of white-tailed deer stepped cautiously from the trees. Their ears twitched toward Samuel and Dusty. Finding no reason for concern, they continued walking toward the water. One lowered its head to drink, while the other watched the forest behind them. Samuel remained perfectly still. The deer seemed almost unaware of his presence. After several long moments, they disappeared silently among the trees once more. Only the movement of the grass revealed where they had gone. Dusty continued grazing nearby. Occasionally he lifted his head, looked toward Samuel, then returned contentedly to the rich meadow grass. Their companionship required very few words. After so many years together, quiet presence had become enough. Samuel poured himself a cup of coffee from the small metal pot he carried inside his saddlebag. The rich aroma mixed pleasantly with the scent of pine, river water, and warm earth. He took 1 slow sip. It tasted exactly as frontier coffee usually did. Strong, simple, honest. The kind of drink that quietly prepared a traveler for many more miles. From inside one saddlebag, Samuel removed a small leather notebook. Its pages had become worn after years of traveling countless frontier roads. Inside, he kept careful notes. Not about the letters themselves. Those remained private. Instead, he recorded the condition of trails, bridges needing repair, streams running unusually high, fallen trees, friendly reminders from ranchers, anything that might help make tomorrow's journey a little easier. Today's entry was brief. Mountain trail clear, bridge in good condition, creek running low, meadow peaceful as ever. He smiled after writing the final words. Perhaps peaceful as ever wasn't official postal language, but it felt accurate. Closing the notebook, Samuel leaned back once again. High above, a hawk circled effortlessly against the brilliant blue sky. Cottonwood leaves shimmered. The river sang its endless quiet song. A soft breeze carried the sweet fragrance of wildflowers growing nearby. Time itself seemed slower here. He imagined the countless travelers who had rested beneath this same tree over the years. Hunters, surveyors, ranch families, stagecoach drivers, explorers, perhaps even other mail carriers whose names had long been forgotten. Each had paused for water, for shade, for a simple meal, then continued along the winding trail. The tree had welcomed them all without asking where they came from or where they were going. There was something comforting about places that quietly served everyone. A sudden flutter of wings caught Samuel's attention. A brilliant bluebird landed upon a low branch only a few feet away. For several seconds it tilted its tiny head curiously toward him. Its bright feathers glowed in the afternoon sunlight like pieces of clear summer sky. Then, just as quietly as it had arrived, it flew across the meadow and disappeared among the cottonwoods. Samuel watched until the last flash of blue was gone. Nature seemed full of such brief gifts, moments that lasted only seconds, yet remained in memory for years. Eventually, the shadows beneath the trees shifted ever so slightly. The sun had begun its slow journey westward. There were still many letters waiting to reach their destinations before evening. Samuel rose, stretched comfortably, and gathered his few belongings. Dusty looked up from the meadow. "I suppose our break is over." The old horse walked willingly back toward him. Samuel brushed away a few blades of grass from Dusty's coat before carefully replacing the saddle. The familiar leather creaked softly. Each strap settled into place. Finally, the precious mailbags were secured once more. Every buckle received one last careful inspection. Nothing had shifted. Nothing had been forgotten. Exactly as it should be. Samuel gave the horse an affectionate pat along the neck. "You've earned every mouthful of that grass," Dusty answered with a quiet snort that sounded almost amused. Together they stepped away from the welcoming shade of the old cottonwood. Behind them, the river continued flowing peacefully through the meadow, unchanged by their brief visit. Ahead, the winding frontier trail disappeared between gentle hills where isolated cabins and lonely homesteads waited patiently for the day's mail. With the afternoon breeze at their backs and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats returning once again, horse and rider continued their quiet journey across the American West, delivering hope to lonely homesteads. The afternoon sun settled comfortably above the western hills as Samuel and Dusty continued beyond the quiet meadow. The cool shade of the cottonwoods slowly disappeared behind them, replaced once again by rolling grasslands broken only by scattered groves of pine and aspen. The trail here was narrower than the roads connecting the larger settlements. Years of horses, wagons, and patient travelers had worn a single winding path through the prairie, its gentle curves following the shape of the land rather than cutting across it. Samuel preferred these smaller trails. They carried him to places where few other travelers ventured, places where every visitor was remembered, places where the arrival of the mail was not simply expected, it was celebrated. A gentle breeze stirred the tall grasses until they rippled like waves upon a quiet sea. Above them, white clouds drifted lazily across the deep blue sky. The world seemed wonderfully unhurried. Dusty maintained his familiar walking pace. Neither horse nor rider wished to arrive too quickly. There was quiet satisfaction in traveling slowly enough to notice the little things. A rabbit darting into a patch of sagebrush, the distant whistle of a marmot somewhere among the rocks, the sweet scent of wild lavender growing beside the trail, a tiny stream that reflected the afternoon sunlight like polished silver. Samuel had long ago discovered that the frontier rewarded those who paid attention, not with excitement, but with peaceful beauty. After another mile, the first sign of the next homestead appeared. A weathered split-rail fence stretched across a gentle hillside. Behind it grazed a small herd of cattle, their coats glowing warmly beneath the afternoon sun. Beyond the pasture stood a modest log cabin. Its roof was made of hand-cut cedar shingles, weathered to a soft gray by many seasons of rain and snow. A thin ribbon of smoke rose peacefully from its stone chimney. Nearby stood a red-painted barn, a chicken coop, and a small vegetable garden surrounded by a handmade wooden fence. Everything spoke of careful work. Nothing seemed wasted. Nothing seemed hurried. Samuel smiled. He knew this place well. The Miller family had lived here for nearly 10 years. When they first arrived, there had been nothing but open prairie. Every tree they had planted, every fence they had built, every field they had cleared, each season had added another small piece to their home. As Samuel approached the front gate, the cabin door opened. Mrs. Miller stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sunlight. The moment she recognized the familiar horse, her face brightened.
"Samuel!"
she waved cheerfully.
"Good afternoon! I hope today might be mail day. It certainly is."
Before Samuel had even finished dismounting, 2 young boys hurried from the barn carrying wooden buckets. Their boots kicked up little clouds of dust as they ran. The older of the 2 stopped just short of Dusty. "May I give him some water?" "I think he'd appreciate that very much." The boy carefully filled a large wooden trough while his younger brother gently stroked Dusty's neck. The old horse accepted the attention with calm dignity. He had become accustomed to making young friends wherever the trail carried him. Mrs. Miller welcomed Samuel onto the porch. "I've baked fresh cornbread." The smell reached the road. She laughed softly. "I hoped it would." Samuel removed the carefully wrapped letters from his leather mailbag. "There are 3 today." She accepted them with both hands. One envelope carried elegant handwriting. Another bore the familiar seal of the county office. The third was addressed in large, careful letters. Mrs. Miller immediately recognized the first. "My sister. It's been almost a month." Her voice carried the quiet happiness of someone who understood how precious letters could be. The younger boy looked hopefully toward Samuel. "Anything for me?" Samuel smiled and searched the remaining bundle. "There certainly is." He handed over a small folded envelope. The boy's eyes widened. "My cousin wrote back! I believe he did!" "I told him about our new puppy." "I can't wait to read what he says." Samuel chuckled. "I'm sure he'll have plenty to tell you." For several peaceful minutes, the family gathered together on the porch. Mrs. Miller carefully opened her sister's letter. The younger boy slowly sounded out each word of his own. His older brother looked over his shoulder, helping whenever the handwriting became difficult to read. Meanwhile, Mr. Miller emerged from the barn carrying a wooden toolbox. His broad smile appeared the moment he noticed Samuel. "Perfect timing. I try." They shook hands warmly. "Any news from town?" "The wheat harvest looks promising. The blacksmith finally repaired the bridge wagon, and Mrs. Parker insists her bakery is making the finest biscuits west of the Mississippi." Mr. Miller laughed. "That sounds exactly like her." "It certainly does." Their conversation drifted comfortably from weather to crops, from neighboring ranches to the condition of the mountain trail. None of it felt urgent. Frontier conversations rarely did. People valued simple company almost as much as useful news. Samuel noticed something new beside the cabin, a young apple tree. Its slender branches carried only a handful of small green apples. "You planted one," Mr. Miller nodded proudly. "This spring, my grandchildren may enjoy the first real harvest." Samuel smiled. "Some things are worth planting even if someone else gathers the fruit." The farmer rested one hand gently against the little tree. "My father used to say the same." The words lingered pleasantly in the afternoon air. They seemed perfectly suited to the frontier. Every fence, every orchard, every schoolhouse, every church. Someone had built them knowing future generations would benefit. Perhaps the mail worked much the same way. Every letter carried kindness forward. Every delivery strengthened friendships across great distances. Soon it was time to continue. Samuel carefully checked that every remaining letter was secure inside the mailbags. Dusty had finished drinking and now waited patiently beneath the shade of a cottonwood near the gate. Before leaving, Mrs. Miller handed Samuel a neatly wrapped bundle. "Fresh cornbread. You'll need something for supper." "I couldn't possibly." "You've carried enough letters to this house.
Please.
Samuel accepted it gratefully.
Thank you.
The younger boy waved enthusiastically.
See you next month. I'll look forward to it.
Dusty stepped back onto the trail with his familiar steady gait. The Miller family remained at the gate, waving until horse and rider disappeared beyond the next gentle hill. For several minutes, Samuel rode without speaking. Moments like those always stayed with him. The letters themselves were important, but so were the smiles that greeted them, the quiet conversations, the warm invitations, the simple kindness shared between neighbors separated by miles of open country. Farther along the trail, another cabin came into view, then another beyond that. Each home stood alone against the vast landscape, yet none truly felt isolated. Invisible threads connected them all. Some were family ties, some were friendships, some were memories. And many of those threads traveled quietly inside the weathered leather mailbags resting beside Dusty's saddle. The afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains. Golden light spilled across the prairie once more, bathing every fence, every cabin, and every winding trail in gentle warmth. Samuel adjusted his hat against the sunlight. Several more homesteads still waited ahead. Several more families hoped to hear from loved ones far away. With calm purpose and steady hoofbeats, the faithful mail carrier continued onward, carrying not merely envelopes and parcels, but small reminders that even on the widest frontier, no one was ever truly forgotten. Rain on the frontier trail. The afternoon had worn on so gently that Samuel almost failed to notice the first signs of change. Only an hour earlier, the sky had been a brilliant shade of blue stretching from one horizon to the other. Soft white clouds had drifted lazily above the prairie, casting slow-moving shadows across fields of waving grass. Now those clouds were growing taller. Their bright white edges had softened into gentle shades of gray. There was no sense of danger, only the quiet promise of summer rain. Samuel lifted his eyes toward the western sky. He had spent enough years riding the frontier to recognize nature's subtle signals. The breeze had shifted. The scent of warm grass was slowly giving way to the unmistakable fragrance of approaching rain. Even Dusty seemed to notice. The old bay horse flicked his ears forward before taking one slow, thoughtful breath. "We'll have a little shower before long," Samuel said softly. Dusty answered with a gentle snort. Neither of them minded. Rain was simply another companion along the trail. The winding road continued through rolling hills where clusters of aspens shimmered like tiny mirrors in the changing light. Their leaves, so lively only moments before, now moved more quietly as the breeze settled. Somewhere far away, thunder murmured. Not sharp, not frightening, only a deep, distant rumble beyond the mountains. It sounded less like a storm and more like the earth stretching after a long afternoon. Samuel smiled. "There you are." The first drop landed upon the brim of his felt hat. Then another, another. For several quiet moments, only a handful of gentle raindrops drifted through the still air. They darkened the dusty trail in scattered circles. Tiny splashes appeared upon the broad leaves of nearby shrubs. Dusty never changed his pace. He had crossed countless summer showers over the years. To him, rain was simply part of the landscape. Samuel reached behind the saddle and removed a neatly folded oilskin riding coat. The heavy waterproof fabric had accompanied him on nearly every journey across the frontier. Years of careful use had darkened its surface to a rich brown, while countless tiny creases told stories of mountain storms, autumn drizzles, and spring downpours. He slipped it over his shoulders before fastening the simple brass buttons. Almost immediately, the rain grew steadier, still gentle, still peaceful, A soft curtain of silver drifted across the prairie. The familiar scent of wet earth rose into the cool afternoon air. Samuel breathed deeply. No perfume created by people had ever matched the fragrance of fresh rain falling upon open grasslands. The dust that had followed horse and rider throughout the morning quietly disappeared. Every blade of grass seemed brighter, every wildflower richer in color. Tiny drops of water gathered along the petals of purple lupines and yellow sunflowers growing beside the trail. The entire landscape appeared freshly washed. A pair of meadowlarks settled beneath a low cedar tree, patiently waiting for the shower to pass. Nearby, several rabbits disappeared beneath thick sagebrush where the branches formed a natural shelter. Nature accepted the rain without complaint. Perhaps people could learn something from that quiet acceptance. The trail entered another grove of cottonwoods. Their enormous leaves caught thousands of raindrops that danced softly from branch to branch before finally reaching the ground. The gentle tapping created a peaceful rhythm all its own. Tap, tap, tap. Samuel had often thought that every place possessed its own music. The prairie offered whispering grasses. Mountain streams sang over polished stones. Pine forests hummed softly with the breeze. Now the cottonwoods performed their gentle rain song. Dusty lowered his head slightly as they continued beneath the trees. The broad canopy above sheltered them from much of the rainfall, though countless tiny droplets still drifted gently through the leaves. Samuel reached forward to pat the horse's neck. "You've seen worse than this." Dusty flicked one ear. He certainly had. Samuel remembered one autumn journey nearly 8 years earlier when rain had continued for 3 straight days. Every creek had overflowed. The roads had become thick with mud. Yet Dusty had carried the mail without hesitation. Somehow, together, they had still managed to deliver every letter. That memory brought a quiet smile. Faithfulness was rarely dramatic. It simply appeared day after day, regardless of sunshine or rain. The gentle shower continued. Ahead, the outline of a small wooden bridge emerged through the mist. A narrow creek flowed beneath it, now slightly fuller than it had been that morning. Samuel guided Dusty carefully across the damp planks. The bridge creaked softly beneath the horse's weight, but its sturdy timbers held firm. On the far side, a tiny log cabin rested beside the stream. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney despite the rain. Its front porch stood empty, though several rocking chairs waited beneath the shelter of the roof. Samuel recognized the place. Mrs. Abigail Carter lived there alone. Her husband had passed away many winters earlier, but she continued tending her small garden, caring for a handful of chickens, and welcoming every traveler with remarkable kindness. As Samuel approached, the cabin door opened. Mrs. Carter stepped onto the porch carrying a blue shawl around her shoulders. The rain had silvered her white hair, though she seemed entirely unconcerned by the weather.
"Samuel, good afternoon! You've arrived just before the kettle begins to boil. I seem to have excellent timing."
She laughed warmly. "I've always believed the rain makes tea taste better." Samuel dismounted beneath the porch roof while Dusty patiently waited beside the hitching rail. Mrs. Carter handed him a dry towel. "You'll catch a chill if you stay damp."
"I appreciate that."
Inside, the little cabin glowed with warmth. A fire crackled gently inside the stone fireplace despite the mild season. Copper kettles hung neatly above the hearth. Pressed wildflowers decorated the walls beside family photographs, carefully arranged in simple wooden frames. The whole room smelled of cedar, fresh bread, and chamomile tea. Mrs. Carter accepted 2 letters from Samuel's mailbag. One came from her niece in Kansas. The other carried a familiar military seal. She smiled softly. "My grandson always writes such long letters. I'm sure he'll have many stories." "He always does." She carefully placed both envelopes upon the table. "I'll save them for this evening," Samuel understood. Some letters deserved to be enjoyed slowly. Mrs. Carter poured steaming tea into a sturdy ceramic cup. Rain continued tapping gently against the windows while they shared a few quiet minutes beside the fire. Neither felt any need to hurry the conversation. Outside, the world seemed wonderfully peaceful beneath the gray afternoon sky. Eventually, the rain began to soften. The steady tapping became scattered droplets. Sunlight slowly returned, filtering through the retreating clouds until tiny diamonds of water sparkled upon every leaf outside the window. Mrs. Carter looked toward the brightening sky. "It seems the storm has finished washing the prairie." Samuel smiled. "It certainly has." Stepping back outside, he found the entire landscape transformed. The grasses glistened beneath fresh sunlight. The creek reflected patches of blue sky returning overhead. Far across the valley, a magnificent rainbow arched gracefully above the hills. Its colors appeared gentle rather than brilliant, as though painted carefully into the quiet afternoon. Dusty lifted his head toward the rainbow before turning back to Samuel. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The old horse gave a quiet breath. Samuel adjusted the leather mailbags one more time. Every letter remained perfectly dry, exactly as they should. He thanked Mrs. Carter for her kindness, settled comfortably into the saddle once again, and guided Dusty back onto the winding trail. Behind them, the little cabin disappeared among the rain-washed cottonwoods. Ahead, the evening sun slowly lowered toward the western mountains, casting warm golden light across a landscape renewed by gentle rain. The frontier felt quieter than ever, and with every steady hoofbeat, horse and rider continued carrying messages of hope through a world that seemed, for a little while, washed perfectly clean. Evening arrival at the stagecoach station. The afternoon slowly drifted toward evening. After the gentle summer rain, the frontier seemed to breathe with renewed freshness. Every blade of grass sparkled beneath the lowering sun, while tiny droplets still clung to the branches of cottonwoods and aspens, catching the light like countless little lanterns. Samuel always enjoyed these quiet hours before sunset. The world seemed to soften. Colors became warmer. Shadows stretched longer across the hills. Even Dusty's steady hoofbeats sounded calmer upon the damp trail. The road gradually widened once again. Deep wagon ruts appeared beside the familiar horse path, their edges still dark from the recent rain. Samuel recognized them immediately. This stretch connected several frontier settlements with one of the region's busiest stagecoach routes. Although the road was broader here, it remained peaceful. Travelers were few. Distance had a way of keeping even well-used roads wonderfully quiet. Far ahead, a small cloud of dust drifted lazily into the evening sky. Samuel narrowed his eyes beneath the brim of his hat. A stagecoach, not moving quickly, simply following its regular schedule. Within a few minutes, the coach became clearly visible. 4 sturdy horses pulled the weathered vehicle along the winding road with practiced confidence. Their harnesses jingled softly with each steady step. The driver sat comfortably upon the high bench, guiding the team with calm hands rather than hurried movements. When he spotted Samuel, he lifted one hand in greeting. "Evening, Samuel! Good evening!" Ben Walker had driven this route for nearly 12 years. Like Samuel, he knew every bend in the road, every creek crossing, every steep hill, every welcoming porch where travelers could find fresh water and friendly conversation. As the coach drew alongside, the horses naturally slowed. Neither man felt the need to rush their meeting. "Rod's in good shape," Ben said. Rain settled the dust nicely. Samuel nodded. "The mountain bridge is still solid. Good to hear." Ben leaned slightly forward. "Any mail for the station?" "A fair bundle. The postmaster will be pleased." Inside the coach, 2 passengers looked quietly through the windows. One elderly gentleman removed his hat politely. A young woman smiled before returning to the book resting upon her lap. There were no crowded coaches here upon the frontier, only a handful of travelers moving patiently between distant towns. After wishing each other safe journeys, the two old friends continued along their separate routes. The stagecoach gradually disappeared behind a line of cottonwoods, its gentle rumble fading into the peaceful evening. Dusty continued onward. The road now followed a shallow valley where a narrow river wound gracefully through tall grasses and willow trees. Golden sunlight reflected from its calm surface, creating shimmering ribbons of light that danced beside the trail. Swallows skimmed low above the water, catching insects that hovered in the cooling air. Somewhere farther downstream, frogs had already begun their evening chorus. Samuel smiled. Nature always seemed to know exactly when the day was changing. As they rounded another gentle bend, the stagecoach station finally came into view. It stood upon a low rise overlooking the valley. Unlike the tiny cabins scattered across the prairie, this building had been designed with travelers in mind. A broad front porch stretched across its entire length. Several rocking chairs rested beneath the shelter of the roof. Nearby stood a large stable, a blacksmith's shed, and a spacious corral where fresh horses waited for arriving coaches. A tall wooden sign gently swayed above the entrance, Cottonwood Station. The freshly painted letters glowed warmly beneath the evening sun. Thin streams of smoke curled from two stone chimneys. Someone inside was preparing supper. The rich scent of beef stew, fresh biscuits, and roasting vegetables drifted pleasantly across the yard. Samuel felt his stomach gently remind him that lunchtime had been many miles behind. Before he had even reached the hitching rail, the station keeper stepped onto the porch. Thomas Green was a broad-shouldered man with kind gray eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He had welcomed travelers to Cottonwood Station for almost 20 years.
"Samuel! Good evening, Thomas!"
"You've arrived just in time. I often seem to." Thomas laughed warmly.
"I've got fresh coffee waiting. I was hoping you might."
Samuel dismounted while a stable hand approached to greet Dusty. The young man removed the horse's bridle with gentle hands. "We'll take good care of him," Samuel nodded.
"I know you will."
Dusty followed willingly toward the stable. Fresh hay had already been spread inside his stall. A bucket of cool well water waited nearby. The old horse seemed perfectly content. Inside the station, the large common room glowed with warm lamplight despite the lingering daylight outside. A stone fireplace occupied one wall, though only a small fire burned within it, not for warmth, simply for comfort. The polished wooden floor creaked softly beneath Samuel's boots. Several travelers sat quietly around sturdy oak tables. One elderly couple shared a simple supper while studying a folded map. A traveling salesman carefully polished his spectacles before writing a letter beside the window. Near the fireplace, a young school teacher quietly knitted a blue scarf while listening to the gentle conversations around her. No one spoke loudly. Long journeys seemed to encourage peaceful voices. Thomas accepted Samuel's leather mailbags and carried them toward the small postal desk near the rear of the room. Together they sorted the station's deliveries. Letters for nearby ranches, newspapers, business documents, a small parcel wrapped carefully in brown paper. Every item quickly found its proper place. Thomas smiled as he examined one envelope.
"Mrs. Evans has been expecting this. I suspected as much. Her son promised to write after reaching Denver. He kept his word. He always does."
Samuel quietly appreciated these familiar moments. Although he rarely knew the contents of the letters he carried, he often recognized the handwriting. Certain names appeared month after month, year after year. Entire friendships unfolded one envelope at a time. After finishing the sorting, Thomas returned carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. They settled into matching rocking chairs upon the front porch. The evening air had become wonderfully cool. Across the valley, the setting sun painted the western sky with gentle shades of amber, rose, and lavender. The mountains stood quietly beneath the glowing horizon, their peaks already beginning to fade into soft blue shadows. For several minutes, neither man spoke. There was no need. The silence felt comfortable. Some friendships required very few words. Eventually, Thomas smiled. "You know," Samuel looked over, "I've watched this road for 20 years. I believe you have. I've seen soldiers, miners, families, surveyors, newlyweds, preachers, cowboys." And every one of them slowed down when they reached this porch. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps everyone needs a place to rest." Thomas looked toward the distant trail. "I think they need a place where someone simply says, 'Welcome. Sit for a while.'" Samuel smiled. "I think you're right." The evening breeze stirred gently through the cottonwood trees. Somewhere inside the stable, Dusty shifted contentedly in his stall. A lantern beside the porch flickered softly as daylight slowly gave way to dusk. One by one, stars began appearing above the quiet frontier. The same stars that had watched Samuel leave the post office before dawn now welcomed him toward another peaceful evening. His journey for the day was nearly complete. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another trail, another collection of carefully written letters. But for now, there was only the comforting sound of rocking chairs, warm coffee, distant crickets, and the quiet satisfaction of another day's faithful work gently coming to its end. Campfire beneath the western sky. The last traces of sunset lingered above the western mountains as Samuel stepped down from the porch of Cottonwood Station. The day's journey had officially ended. The letters had been delivered. The mailbags rested safely inside the station office, ready for tomorrow's route. For many travelers, this would have been the perfect place to spend the night. A warm meal, a comfortable bed, friendly conversation. Yet Samuel had long since formed another quiet habit. Whenever the weather was kind and the road ahead was safe, he preferred sleeping beneath the open sky. The frontier offered few greater comforts. Thomas Green understood without needing an explanation. "You'll be camping by the creek again?" Samuel smiled. "If the old cottonwoods haven't wandered away. I checked this afternoon. They're still exactly where you left them. I had hoped so." Thomas laughed softly. Some things are wonderfully dependable. A few minutes later, Samuel had gathered his bedroll, blanket, coffee pot, and a small canvas sack containing tomorrow's breakfast. Dusty had already finished his hay and stood patiently outside the stable, his ears turning toward Samuel the moment he heard familiar footsteps. "Ready for one last little walk?" The old bay horse gave a gentle breath. Together they followed a narrow path leading away from the station. It curved through a quiet meadow before reaching a small creek less than half a mile away. Samuel had camped here many times over the years. The place rarely changed. A circle of smooth stones marked the remains of old campfires built by travelers long before his own first visit. Several enormous cottonwood trees leaned peacefully over the creek, their broad branches offering shelter without hiding the stars. The grass remained soft throughout the seasons. The creek flowed gently enough to lull even restless minds toward sleep. It felt less like discovering a campsite and more like returning to an old friend. Samuel removed Dusty's saddle. The familiar leather gave one quiet creak before resting upon a nearby log. The horse immediately stretched his neck with obvious satisfaction. "You've earned a quiet evening." Dusty wandered a short distance into the meadow where fresh grass grew thick beside the creek. Samuel tied a long lead rope to one of the cottonwoods, giving his faithful companion plenty of room to graze while remaining safely nearby. The old horse lowered his head contentedly. Soon the only sound was the peaceful tearing of grass. Samuel knelt beside the circle of stones. Inside remained a little dry tinder left beneath a flat piece of bark during his previous visit several weeks earlier. Years upon the frontier had taught him simple habits that often made life easier. He added a few small twigs, then several larger sticks gathered from beneath the surrounding trees. Finally, one careful strike of flint against steel. Tiny sparks danced briefly through the cool evening air. Within moments, a small orange flame appeared. It grew patiently rather than quickly. Samuel never rushed a campfire. Like many worthwhile things, it preferred steady attention. Soon cheerful flames flickered among the neatly arranged logs. The gentle crackling blended beautifully with the quiet murmur of the nearby creek. The air carried familiar scents: fresh pine, cool water, wood smoke, damp earth. Together they created an aroma Samuel had come to associate with peaceful evenings and honest work completed. He filled his small coffee pot with creek water and suspended it above the fire. Beside it, he warmed the bundle of cornbread Mrs. Miller had given him earlier that afternoon. Even after many hours, it still smelled wonderfully fresh. As darkness gradually settled across the valley, the frontier transformed once again. The brilliant colors of sunset faded into soft shades of blue and silver. The first evening star appeared above the western ridge. Soon another joined it, then another. Before long, the entire sky glittered with familiar constellations. Samuel leaned comfortably against a fallen log. There were no city lights here. Nothing dimmed the heavens. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a pale river flowing silently through the night. He had seen this same sky thousands of times, yet it never became ordinary. Each evening offered a slightly different arrangement of drifting clouds, a different brightness to the stars, a different feeling carried by the night breeze. Dusty lifted his head from the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote gave a long, gentle call. Another answered from much farther away. The voices echoed softly across the open valley before gradually fading into silence. Samuel smiled. Many newcomers found the sound unsettling. He never had. To him, it simply meant the frontier was continuing its own nightly conversation. Nearby, crickets began their steady chorus. Tree frogs answered from the creek. Occasionally, a fish disturbed the calm surface of the water with a quiet splash before everything settled once more. No single sound dominated. Instead, each joined together to form a peaceful symphony that belonged entirely to the American West. Samuel poured himself a steaming cup of coffee. The warmth felt pleasant against the cooling evening air. He thought about the people he had visited throughout the day. Mrs. Parker proudly serving warm biscuits before sunrise. The children waiting outside the Willow Creek post office. The Miller family reading letters together upon their porch. Mrs. Carter smiling beside her fireplace while rain tapped gently against the windows. Thomas Green rocking quietly beneath the evening sky. Each stop had lasted only a short while, yet together they formed the true map of his journey. Not rivers, not mountains, not trails, people. The frontier often appeared empty to those seeing it for the first time. Samuel knew better. It was filled with lives unfolding quietly across enormous distances. Farmers planting orchards, teachers guiding children through their first books, blacksmiths shaping iron beside glowing forges, doctors riding through storms to reach lonely cabins, families writing careful letters beneath lamplight. His work simply connected those separate stories. The thought always brought him quiet satisfaction. He reached into one saddlebag and removed a harmonica. Its brass edges had grown smooth after years of careful use. Samuel was no great musician. He never tried to be. But on evenings like this, when no one else was nearby, he sometimes played a few simple melodies remembered from childhood. The gentle tune drifted softly across the meadow, slow, unhurried, almost blending with the sound of the creek itself. Dusty lifted one ear toward the music before returning to his grazing. Perhaps he had heard these melodies often enough to consider them another ordinary part of camp. When the final note faded into the night, silence returned so naturally that Samuel almost hesitated to move. Some silences deserved to remain unbroken. The fire had settled into glowing red embers. Tiny sparks floated upward, disappearing among the countless stars. Samuel spread his bedroll upon the soft grass. He folded one blanket beneath his head while another rested lightly across his shoulders. The earth still held the day's gentle warmth. Above him, cottonwood branches swayed almost imperceptibly in the night breeze. He could hear Dusty quietly cropping grass only a short distance away. It was a comforting sound, a reminder that he was not entirely alone beneath the enormous sky. Samuel looked upward once more. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another trail, another collection of waiting letters, another peaceful day spent carrying hope from one frontier home to another. But tomorrow could wait. Tonight belonged to the stars, the campfire, the creek, the steady breathing of a trusted horse, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from an ordinary day's work faithfully completed. Gradually, even the last glowing embers softened into gentle darkness. The valley grew still. Above, the stars continued their silent journey across the heavens, and beneath their timeless light, the American frontier settled peacefully into another quiet night. Autumn along the mail route. Morning arrived quietly. Long before the sun climbed above the eastern hills, Samuel awoke to the gentle murmur of the creek and the soft rustle of cottonwood leaves overhead. For a few peaceful moments, he simply remained where he was. The blanket still held the warmth of the night. Above him, the sky slowly changed from deep navy blue to gentle shades of lavender and pale silver. One by one, the brightest stars quietly faded into the growing light. Dusty was already awake. The faithful bay horse stood beside the creek, calmly drinking from the clear water before lifting his head to watch the first light spread across the valley. Samuel smiled. "You always seem to know exactly when morning begins," Dusty answered with a quiet breath. The fire from the evening before had become nothing more than a circle of cool gray ash. Samuel carefully scattered the ashes before covering the fire ring with fresh earth. He always left a campsite as though no one had ever been there. That was another lesson the frontier had taught him. Take only memories. Leave only kindness. Soon the familiar saddle rested once again upon Dusty's broad back. The leather mail bags, carefully protected throughout the night, were secured exactly where they belonged. A final sip of warm coffee completed the morning routine. The day could begin. As horse and rider followed the winding trail beyond the creek, Samuel noticed something different. The air carried a sharper freshness than it had only a few weeks earlier. Summer had not disappeared, but autumn had quietly arrived. The first signs were almost too subtle to notice. A few golden leaves drifted gently from the cottonwood branches. Tiny patches of crimson appeared among distant shrubs. The morning breeze felt cooler against his face. Nature never hurried the changing seasons. Instead, it transformed the landscape little by little, inviting patient observers to discover each quiet change. Samuel had always loved autumn. The season carried a sense of peaceful gratitude. The busiest days of planting were behind the farmers. The long summer journeys had become gentler. Soon families would gather for harvest celebrations before preparing for the first snowfall. The frontier itself seemed to breathe a little more slowly. The trail climbed gradually toward another broad valley. From its crest, Samuel paused to admire the landscape stretching before him. The hills glowed with warm shades of amber, gold, and soft green. Aspen groves shimmered like fields of tiny golden coins beneath the morning sunlight. Evergreen pines stood dark and steady among the changing colors, reminding him that some parts of the landscape remained constant through every season. Thin ribbons of mist floated above the winding river below. As the rising sun touched them, they slowly dissolved into the crisp morning air. It looked almost as though the valley itself were waking from a peaceful dream. Dusty stood quietly beside him. Neither seemed eager to continue just yet. Beautiful views deserved a few extra moments. Eventually, the trail descended once again. Golden leaves drifted lazily across the road, carried by the light breeze before settling softly upon the ground. Some landed upon Dusty's mane. Others rested against Samuel's boots. The old horse hardly seemed to notice. He simply continued walking with his familiar steady rhythm. The sound beneath his hooves had changed. Instead of dry summer dust, the trail was now lightly covered with crisp fallen leaves. Each step produced a gentle rustling that blended beautifully with the surrounding forest. Samuel found the sound deeply comforting. It reminded him of turning pages inside a well-loved book. Ahead, movement caught his attention. A small herd of elk grazed peacefully near the edge of a meadow. The largest bull stood proudly among them. His magnificent antlers reached high above his head like the branches of an ancient tree. Sunlight reflected warmly across his rich brown coat. Samuel gently shortened the reins. Dusty slowed immediately. The elk looked toward the approaching travelers but showed no fear. They simply watched with calm curiosity. For several long moments, people and wildlife shared the same quiet morning. Then, with graceful confidence, the herd disappeared into the forest. Their footsteps made almost no sound. Only gently swaying branches revealed where they had gone. Samuel tipped his hat slightly. Safe travels. Perhaps he spoke to the elk, perhaps to himself. The frontier belonged equally to every living creature crossing its trails. By mid-morning the sun had warmed the valley, though the cool freshness of autumn remained pleasantly in the air. Samuel reached another familiar ranch. Unlike the Miller homestead, this property specialized in apple orchards. Dozens of neatly planted trees stretched across the hillside. Their branches bent beneath the weight of bright red and golden fruit. Several families worked quietly among the rows. Wooden baskets gradually filled with freshly picked apples. Children carried smaller baskets while laughing softly with one another. No one hurried. Harvest followed its own gentle rhythm. Mr. Collins noticed Samuel approaching and raised a welcoming hand.
"Morning! Good morning! Would you care for an apple?"
"I never refuse one from your orchard." The farmer selected a large crimson apple before handing it to Samuel. Its skin gleamed in the morning sunlight. One crisp bite released sweet juice carrying the unmistakable flavor of early autumn. Samuel smiled. "I believe this year's harvest may be your best. We've been fortunate. The spring rains arrived exactly when we needed them." Samuel handed over the day's letters. Mr. Collins tucked them carefully inside his coat before calling to his youngest granddaughter.
"Emily!"
The little girl hurried over carrying an empty basket nearly half her size.
"This is Samuel, the mail carrier?"
"The very same." Emily looked at the leather mail bags with wide eyes. "Do all the letters fit inside there?" Samuel chuckled. "Most days. Have you carried letters everywhere?" "Not everywhere, but enough places to know that people smile the same way when good news arrives." She thought carefully about that answer before smiling herself. "I'd like to write letters someday. I'm sure someone will be very happy to receive them." Before leaving, Mr. Collins placed 2 fresh apples inside Samuel's saddlebag. "For the road? I appreciate that." "The trees insist," Samuel laughed. "I'll thank them as well." Once again the trail carried him onward. Golden leaves continued drifting gently across the landscape. The sunlight had softened into the warm glow that only autumn seemed able to create. Even the wind sounded different now. Instead of carrying the lively songs of summer insects, it whispered quietly through drying grasses and colorful branches. As the afternoon slowly approached, Samuel realized another season had quietly become part of his countless journeys. He had crossed these same hills in spring blossoms, summer sunshine, winter snow. Now autumn welcomed him with painted forests, cool mornings, and peaceful harvests. Each season changed the scenery, yet one thing remained wonderfully constant. Wherever the trail wandered, someone waited for the mail. Someone watched the distant road with hopeful eyes. Someone believed that before the day was over, familiar hoofbeats would once again appear beyond the next gentle rise. And so Samuel and Dusty continued through the golden countryside, carrying not only carefully written letters, but also the quiet certainty that even as the seasons changed, kindness and connection continued faithfully from one home to the next. Autumn along the mail route. Morning arrived quietly. Long before the sun climbed above the eastern hills, Samuel awoke to the gentle murmur of the creek and the soft rustle of cottonwood leaves overhead. For a few peaceful moments, he simply remained where he was. The blanket still held the warmth of the night. Above him, the sky slowly changed from deep navy blue to gentle shades of lavender and pale silver. One by one, the brightest stars quietly faded into the growing light. Dusty was already awake. The faithful bay horse stood beside the creek, calmly drinking from the clear water before lifting his head to watch the first light spread across the valley. Samuel smiled. "You always seem to know exactly when morning begins," Dusty answered with a quiet breath. The fire from the evening before had become nothing more than a circle of cool gray ash. Samuel carefully scattered the ashes before covering the fire ring with fresh earth. He always left a campsite as though no one had ever been there. That was another lesson the frontier had taught him. Take only memories. Leave only kindness. Soon the familiar saddle rested once again upon Dusty's broad back. The leather mail bags, carefully protected throughout the night, were secured exactly where they belonged. A final sip of warm coffee completed the morning routine. The day could begin. As horse and rider followed the winding trail beyond the creek, Samuel noticed something different. The air carried a sharper freshness than it had only a few weeks earlier. Summer had not disappeared, but autumn had quietly arrived. The first signs were almost too subtle to notice. A few golden leaves drifted gently from the cottonwood branches. Tiny patches of crimson appeared among distant shrubs. The morning breeze felt cooler against his face. Nature never hurried the changing seasons. Instead, it transformed the landscape little by little, inviting patient observers to discover each quiet change. Samuel had always loved autumn. The season carried a sense of peaceful gratitude. The busiest days of planting were behind the farmers. The long summer journeys had become gentler. Soon families would gather for harvest celebrations before preparing for the first snowfall. The frontier itself seemed to breathe a little more slowly. The trail climbed gradually toward another broad valley. From its crest, Samuel paused to admire the landscape stretching before him. The hills glowed with warm shades of amber, gold, and soft green. Aspen groves shimmered like fields of tiny golden coins beneath the morning sunlight. Evergreen pines stood dark and steady among the changing colors, reminding him that some parts of the landscape remained constant through every season. Thin ribbons of mist floated above the winding river below. As the rising sun touched them, they slowly dissolved into the crisp morning air. It looked almost as though the valley itself were waking from a peaceful dream. Dusty stood quietly beside him. Neither seemed eager to continue just yet. Beautiful views deserved a few extra moments. Eventually the trail descended once again. Golden leaves drifted lazily across the road, carried by the light breeze before settling softly upon the ground. Some landed upon Dusty's mane. Others rested against Samuel's boots. The old horse hardly seemed to notice. He simply continued walking with his familiar, steady rhythm. The sound beneath his hooves had changed. Instead of dry summer dust, the trail was now lightly covered with crisp fallen leaves. Each step produced a gentle rustling that blended beautifully with the surrounding forest. Samuel found the sound deeply comforting. It reminded him of turning pages inside a well-loved book. Ahead, movement caught his attention. A small herd of elk grazed peacefully near the edge of a meadow. The largest bull stood proudly among them. His magnificent antlers reached high above his head like the branches of an ancient tree. Sunlight reflected warmly across his rich brown coat. Samuel gently shortened the reins. Dusty slowed immediately. The elk looked toward the approaching travelers but showed no fear. They simply watched with calm curiosity. For several long moments, people and wildlife shared the same quiet morning. Then, with graceful confidence, the herd disappeared into the forest. Their footsteps made almost no sound. Only gently swaying branches revealed where they had gone. Samuel tipped his hat slightly. Safe travels. Perhaps he spoke to the elk. Perhaps to himself. The frontier belonged equally to every living creature crossing its trails. By mid-morning, the sun had warmed the valley, though the cool freshness of autumn remained pleasantly in the air. Samuel reached another familiar ranch. Unlike the Miller homestead, this property specialized in apple orchards. Dozens of neatly planted trees stretched across the hillside, their branches bent beneath the weight of bright red and golden fruit. Several families worked quietly among the rows. Wooden baskets gradually filled with freshly picked apples. Children carried smaller baskets while laughing softly with one another. No one hurried. Harvest followed its own gentle rhythm. Mr. Collins noticed Samuel approaching and raised a welcoming hand.
"Morning! Good morning! Would you care for an apple?"
"I never refuse one from your orchard." The farmer selected a large crimson apple before handing it to Samuel. Its skin gleamed in the morning sunlight. One crisp bite released sweet juice carrying the unmistakable flavor of early autumn. Samuel smiled. "I believe this year's harvest may be your best. We've been fortunate. The spring rains arrived exactly when we needed them." Samuel handed over the day's letters. Mr. Collins tucked them carefully inside his coat before calling to his youngest granddaughter.
"Emily!"
The little girl hurried over carrying an empty basket nearly half her size.
"This is Samuel? The mail carrier?"
"The very same." Emily looked at the leather mailbags with wide eyes.
"Do all the letters fit inside there?"
Samuel chuckled.
"Most days. Have you carried letters everywhere?"
"Not everywhere, but enough places to know that people smile the same way when good news arrives." She thought carefully about that answer before smiling herself.
"I'd like to write letters someday."
"I'm sure someone will be very happy to receive them." Before leaving, Mr. Collins placed 2 fresh apples inside Samuel's saddlebag.
"For the road. I appreciate that. The trees insist."
Samuel laughed. "I'll thank them as well." Once again, the trail carried him onward. Golden leaves continued drifting gently across the landscape. The sunlight had softened into the warm glow that only autumn seemed able to create. Even the wind sounded different now. Instead of carrying the lively songs of summer insects, it whispered quietly through drying grasses and colorful branches. As the afternoon slowly approached, Samuel realized another season had quietly become part of his countless journeys. He had crossed these same hills in spring blossoms, summer sunshine, winter snow. Now autumn welcomed him with painted forests, cool mornings, and peaceful harvests. Each season changed the scenery, yet one thing remained wonderfully constant. Wherever the trail wandered, someone waited for the mail. Someone watched the distant road with hopeful eyes. Someone believed that before the day was over, familiar hoofbeats would once again appear beyond the next gentle rise. And so Samuel and Dusty continued through the golden countryside, carrying not only carefully written letters, but also the quiet certainty that even as the seasons changed, kindness and connection continued faithfully from one home to the next. A quiet good night on the frontier. The years passed as quietly as the seasons. Spring blossoms gave way to warm summers. Golden autumns welcomed peaceful harvests. Winters wrapped the mountains beneath soft blankets of snow before another spring arrived to begin the gentle cycle once again. Through it all, one familiar sight remained unchanged. Each week, almost without fail, a lone horseback mail carrier could be seen following the winding frontier trails. Children who had once raced toward Samuel with eager smiles slowly grew taller. The little boy who proudly showed him his first letter eventually became a young ranch hand writing letters of his own. The little girl who practiced careful handwriting beside the Willow Creek post office someday became the school teacher welcoming another generation of children into her classroom. The orchards planted years earlier now produced generous harvests each autumn. The tiny apple tree Samuel had admired beside the Miller cabin had grown strong enough to cast its own welcoming shade. Families came and went. New cabins appeared upon distant hillsides. Fresh fences stretched across open meadows. Church bells rang from towns that had once existed only as hopeful dreams upon empty prairie. The frontier slowly changed, yet not everything changed. Samuel still greeted each sunrise with quiet gratitude. Dusty, though a little slower now, remained as faithful as ever. His once dark coat had begun to show soft streaks of gray around his muzzle. His steps were more measured than they had been years before, but they remained steady, dependable, comforting. Samuel often found himself slowing his own pace to match his old friends. There was no reason to hurry. The letters would arrive. They always did. One crisp autumn afternoon, Samuel guided Dusty toward Willow Creek once more. The familiar church steeple rose gently above the cottonwood trees. Smoke curled peacefully from chimneys. Children's laughter floated across the quiet streets. Everything felt warmly familiar. Yet one small surprise waited outside the post office. Standing beside the hitching rail was a young man wearing a brand new postal uniform. His boots still carried the shine of fresh leather. His saddlebags looked almost untouched. The young man straightened respectfully as Samuel approached.
"Mr. Harper?" Samuel smiled. "That's me. My name is Daniel. I've been assigned the southern route."
Samuel extended his hand.
"It's good to meet you."
Daniel shook it firmly. "I've heard about you for years," Samuel chuckled. "I hope only the good stories. The best ones. They say you've never lost a letter." "I've certainly tried not to." Daniel looked toward the familiar leather mailbags resting against Dusty's saddle.
"I was wondering."
Samuel nodded gently.
"Go ahead. After all these years, what keeps you riding?"
Samuel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the quiet little town. Mrs. Parker's bakery still filled the street with the comforting scent of fresh bread. Children still gathered outside the post office. Old Mr. Thompson's rocking chair remained upon the porch of the general store, though someone else now occupied it. The same mountains stood quietly beyond the valley. The same wind moved gently through the cottonwood leaves. Finally, Samuel spoke. "It isn't really about carrying letters." Daniel listened carefully. "It's about carrying reassurance." He looked toward a family walking home together. "Every envelope tells someone they haven't been forgotten." He nodded toward the church. "Every newspaper reminds a town that it's still connected to the rest of the country." Then he rested one hand upon Dusty's neck. "And every mile reminds me that ordinary work can become something meaningful if you do it with care." Daniel smiled thoughtfully. "I'll remember that. I hope you do." Later that afternoon, Samuel and Daniel rode together for several peaceful miles. The younger mail carrier asked questions about mountain trails, winter snow, river crossings, and lonely cabins tucked among distant hills. Samuel answered each one patiently, not with grand speeches, simply with the quiet wisdom earned from thousands of ordinary journeys. Never rush your horse. Always greet people by name. Check every saddle strap twice. Protect the mail before protecting yourself. And always leave enough time to admire the sunrise. Daniel laughed softly. I wasn't expecting that last one. You'll understand someday. As evening approached, the two riders reached a gentle fork in the trail. One path continued south. The other followed Samuel's familiar route toward Cottonwood Station. Daniel removed his hat. Thank you. For what? For showing me that this work is about more than delivering mail. Samuel smiled warmly. I think you'll discover the rest on your own. The two men tipped their hats before turning toward their separate roads. For a long moment, Samuel watched the younger rider disappear into the golden evening light. Then he gently turned Dusty toward home. The old horse walked with the same calm confidence he always had. Neither seemed troubled by the passing years. They had never measured life by speed, only by faithfulness. The sun slowly settled behind the Rocky Mountains. Its warm light bathed the frontier in soft shades of amber, copper, and gold. The rivers reflected the glowing sky. The cottonwoods whispered gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a stagecoach bell rang softly before fading into the peaceful landscape. Samuel looked once more across the wide American frontier. He thought of every family whose letters had passed through his hands, every smile waiting beside a porch, every child watching the road, every quiet conversation shared beneath open skies. The work had never made him famous. It had never made him wealthy, but it had given him something far more lasting, a life filled with simple purpose, a life spent connecting people who otherwise might have felt alone. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it had always been enough. The first evening star appeared above the mountains. Samuel tipped his hat toward the quiet horizon. Good night, old friend. Whether he spoke to Dusty, the trail, or the frontier itself, even he wasn't entirely sure. Dusty gave one soft breath. Together they continued down the gently winding road as twilight settled peacefully over the American West. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats slowly faded into the distance. The prairie grasses whispered beneath the evening breeze. The stars brightened one by one above the silent mountains, and somewhere, beyond the next quiet hill, another family would soon open a carefully written letter, smile gently, and feel just a little closer to someone they loved. As always, the frontier rested peacefully for another night. And with that comforting thought, dear friend, our journey comes to a gentle end. Sleep well. May your dreams be as peaceful as quiet trails beneath wide western skies, and may the steady rhythm of distant hoofbeats carry you softly into a restful night. The story closes with Samuel riding quietly into another sunrise. There is no grand farewell, only the comforting sense that his journey will continue, carrying letters, kindness, and connection across the American frontier for as long as the trails endure. The narration gently invites the listener to drift into sleep, accompanied by the imagined sound of steady hoofbeats fading into the peaceful morning.